Caleb Cal Matthews was no stranger to hard work. A third-generation farmer with a heart as big as his sprawling homestead, Cal dedicated his life to tending his land, raising livestock, and preserving the traditions passed down through his family. His property wasn't just a patch of rural acreage. It was a living testament to resilience and community spirit. At the center of his farmyard, nestled among rolling pastures and ancient oak trees, was a small pen housing his favorite baby lamb, Daisy. To Cal, Daisy symbolized hope, innocence, and the promise of a brighter future. Every morning, as the sun spilled over dew-covered fields, Cal would greet his animals with a quiet reverence. Whether milking his cows, harvesting vegetables from his organic garden, or simply taking a moment to watch Daisy frolic in the pasture, Cal found solace in the simple rhythm of rural life. His farmhouse, modest yet filled with cherished memories, had seen generations of laughter, shared meals, and communal gatherings that reinforced the bonds of his tight-knit farming community. But not everyone in the area celebrated this bucolic lifestyle. Over on the other side of town, the local homeowners association, HOA, had recently tightened its grip on community standards. At the helm of this bureaucratic regime was Kerren Westbrook, infamously known as HOA Kerren, a woman whose idea of perfection was as rigid as it was arbitrary. With an ever-present clipboard, a collection of strict regulations, and a penchant for micromanagement, Kerren had earned a reputation for imposing her will on any homeowner who dared stray from the pristine vision she had for the neighborhood. The first collision between these two very different worlds occurred one bright Saturday afternoon. Cal was in the midst of repairing a section of his old wooden fence, a boundary that had defined his property for decades and even provided a rustic backdrop for family picnics and barn dances. While he carefully sanded down splintered boards and replaced a few missing planks, he heard the telltale sound of high heels on gravel. Looking up, Cal spotted Kerren striding purposefully toward him, her face set in an expression that brooked no argument. "Mr. Matthews," Kerren began sharply, clipboard in hand, "it has come to my attention that your fence is in violation of our community's aesthetic guidelines. The weathered look, the uneven repairs, it all detracts from the overall image of our neighborhood." Cal paused, his calloused hands still clutching his tools. "This fence has stood here since before my granddad's time," he replied steadily. "It's not just wood and nails, it's part of the history of this place. I maintain it as best as I can, and it tells our story." Kerren's eyes narrowed as she scanned the worn boards. "History is no excuse for neglect," she snapped. "The HOA requires that every fence be uniformly maintained. I'm issuing you a formal final warning. Correct this violation within 7 days or face penalties." As Kerren's words sank in, Cal's heart pounded, not out of fear, but of righteous indignation. His baby lamb, Daisy, bleated softly from the pen, as if protesting the disruption of their peaceful routine. Cal knew that the fence wasn't merely about curb appeal. It was a symbol of his right to live authentically, to honor the legacy of his forefathers, and to maintain the character of his land in a way that a box of regulations could never capture. Kerren turned on her heel, leaving behind a stack of printed notices and a heavy cloud of bureaucratic tyranny. Standing there, amidst the quiet rustle of wind through the corn and the gentle bleating of sheep, Cal made a silent vow. He wouldn't let someone, no matter how entitled, strip his land of its soul. The battle lines had been drawn, and the first sparks of resistance were already kindling. Fade out on Cal, standing resolute by his time-worn fence with Daisy playfully trotting at his feet, as the distant hum of the tractor and the whisper of the wind promise that this confrontation is only the beginning. The morning after that fateful encounter, Cal awoke to find that his peaceful routine had been upended. As he sipped his strong, black coffee on the farmhouse porch, his eyes caught sight of an envelope taped to his door. The envelope bore the unmistakable seal of the HOA and carried a bold headline: "Violation Notice. Fence Aesthetic Noncompliance. Fine, $750. Every word of the notice dripped with condescension. It listed minute details of the deficiencies in his fence, from the uneven spacing of the boards to the natural weathering that, in Kerren's eyes, transformed charm into eyesore. The fine wasn't just a financial burden. It was a threat meant to instill fear and force conformity. Before Cal could digest the notice, a knock sounded at the door. Two uniformed inspectors arrived, clipboards in hand, introduced as representatives of the HOA's Compliance Division. "Mr. Matthews," one stated curtly, "we've received several complaints regarding the condition of your fence. We are here to conduct an immediate inspection." Cal's expression remained calm, though his mind raced. "I'll be glad to show you around," he said. "But I must insist on seeing the official authorization for this inspection. My fence is maintained in accordance with local regulations, and its history is well documented." As the inspectors began their survey, Kerren herself appeared on the scene, as if summoned by the mere mention of noncompliance. With an air of self-assurance, she barked, "This inspection is not optional. Every homeowner is required to adhere strictly to our guidelines. There is no room for personal sentiment in community standards." Throughout the inspection, Cal answered their questions and presented his records, old photographs of family gatherings, repair logs, and handwritten notes passed down from his grandfather. Yet Kerren interjected at every turn, nitpicking the natural patina on the wood as if it were a glaring defect. "Is that really acceptable?" she sneered, shaking her head. "It must be refurbished immediately." By the time the inspectors left, murmuring uncertainties that contrasted sharply with Kerren's rigid declarations, the finality of Kerren's ultimatum was clear. Cal had 14 days to correct his fence, or face escalating fines and further legal threats. That night, as dusk settled over the fields, Cal sat at his old wooden desk and began drafting a formal complaint to the county zoning office. Every keystroke was weighted with the determination to challenge the overreach of an HOA that sought to erase history in favor of sterile uniformity. Outside, Daisy ambled about in the pen, oblivious to the brewing storm, yet somehow embodying the very spirit of resistance that Cal cherished. The violation notice lay open on the desk like a gauntlet thrown, a challenge to the autonomy of a farmer who refused to let an overzealous bureaucrat dictate the soul of his property. Cal's resolve crystallized. If the HOA demanded a pristine, sanitized aesthetic, then he would show them a side of his heritage they could never tame. Fade out on Cal, his eyes fixed on the horizon beyond the fields, as the cool night air whispered promises of retribution. In the days that followed the inspection, it became painfully clear that Kerren's tactics were only growing more aggressive. As whispers began to ripple through the local farming community, Cal discovered that he was not an isolated target. At the county market and during impromptu gatherings at the feed store, neighbors shared their own tales of petty fines, arbitrary rules, and inexplicable penalties. It wasn't long before rumors emerged that Kerren was using the HOA as a personal cash cow, and that anyone who dared hold onto the legacy of their land was fair game. Late one afternoon, while reviewing the mounting pile of violation notices and documenting the natural weathering on his fence with his trusty camera, Cal overheard a hushed conversation between two local farmers. "Kerren's fines are a racket," one grumbled. "She's been known to waive them for a donation to the HOA fund. It's all about control, not community." The conversation sparked something in Cal, a determination not only to defend his property, but to expose the corruption festering within the HOA. He began a methodical campaign of documentation. Every encounter, every handwritten note, every suspicious phone call was recorded. Hidden cameras were discreetly set up near the fence and around his property to capture any further signs of harassment. One day, while sifting through the recorded footage, Cal saw something that made his blood run cold. Kerren, armed with a set of electric shears, had been spotted near his property. Although she claimed that her tools were used for quick fixes on non-compliant properties, the footage clearly showed her brandishing an electric cutter, an instrument completely out of place in a landscape meant to honor tradition. It was as if she were prepared to do more than just hand out warnings. Armed with this damning evidence, Cal reached out to his neighbor and longtime friend, Marcus, a local journalist with a reputation for digging into community issues. Over a late-night cup of strong coffee at a rundown diner, Marcus listened intently as Cal recounted his experiences. "This isn't just about a fence," Marcus said, scribbling notes. "It's about an abuse of power that's bleeding into every aspect of our lives. If we expose this, it might just bring down the whole HOA." Emboldened by Marcus's support, Cal compiled a comprehensive dossier. He gathered records, photographs, and video clips that showcased not only the natural beauty and historical significance of his property, but also the arbitrary and heavy-handed measures imposed by Kerren. The evidence painted a damning picture of a bureaucrat more interested in control and profit than in the genuine welfare of the community. At the next HOA meeting, a notorious affair where Kerren presided with an iron fist, Cal stepped forward. With his dossier in hand, he questioned the board about the inconsistencies in the fines and the sudden appearance of an electric cutter in her arsenal. Are these actions truly for the benefit of the community, he challenged? Or are they a means to enforce conformity at the expense of our heritage? Murmurs of agreement began to ripple through the room. Several board members, their expressions shifting from deference to doubt, exchanged looks that spoke of hidden grievances. For the first time, it seemed that Kerren's carefully cultivated power might be faltering under the weight of hard evidence and impassioned testimony. By the end of the meeting, though Kerren attempted to dismiss Cal's accusations as personal grievances, the seed of rebellion had been firmly planted. Cal's actions had not only exposed her tactics, but also united a community that was beginning to question whether strict adherence to uniformity was worth the cost of losing their identity. Fade out on Cal packing his dossier into a battered leather briefcase, his resolve hardened by the knowledge that the fight for his home and his legacy was just beginning. One cool, clear morning, Cal awoke to the sound of chaos outside his farmhouse. Rushing to the window, he saw heavy machinery and a cluster of local inspectors swarming his property. To his horror, his beloved wooden fence, already the subject of so many disputes, had been violently cut through, leaving jagged edges and deep gouges that marred its storied surface. The electric cutter, once seen on hidden footage, had now been used with brazen intent. Cal stormed outside, where Kerren was waiting with a smug expression, clipboard clutched tightly. "Your fence is a hazard," she declared. "It fails to meet the HOA standards, and we cannot allow such disrepair to endanger our neighborhood's aesthetic." Fury surged through Cal as he surveyed the damage. "This isn't a hazard, it's a part of my history," he shouted. "You've not only defaced my property, you've disrespected the legacy of generations of farmers who built this land." Kerren's retort was cool and calculated. "I'm simply enforcing the rules, Mr. Matthews. If you cannot maintain your property to our exacting standards, then you leave us no choice but to impose corrective measures." Her voice carried the weight of an edict. But Cal wasn't about to back down. With the evidence of the cutter's destructive marks still fresh in his mind, he presented his counterproposal at the next HOA meeting. "Instead of submitting to arbitrary standards, I will replace my damaged fence," he announced. "I intend to build an electrified metal barrier that not only meets, but exceeds any security or aesthetic guidelines you might propose. It will be a symbol of resilience and a deterrent against further vandalism." Gasps rippled through the room. The notion of an electrified fence was unheard of, and it carried a bold message of defiance. Some board members exchanged impressed glances, while others murmured that perhaps Cal's approach was the only way to counteract Kerren's heavy-handed tactics. Undeterred, Cal laid out detailed blueprints of his proposed design, explaining how the metal fence would be both modern and respectful of the property's heritage. "This fence will protect my home, my livestock, and yes, even my baby lamb Daisy," he said, gesturing affectionately toward the pen where the lamb bleated softly. "It's a practical solution that embodies the spirit of our community, strong, innovative, and unyielding in the face of tyranny." Kerren's face reddened, her authority seemingly challenged for the first time. "Rules are rules," she insisted. "No one is above them, not even you." But the board's mood was shifting. Several members began to voice support for Cal's vision, acknowledging that innovation and respect for history need not be mutually exclusive. The meeting ended with a tentative agreement to review Cal's proposal and, if found acceptable, grant him a temporary exemption from the HOA's outdated mandates. That evening, as Cal stood before the remnants of his old fence, he felt both sorrow and hope. The physical destruction was a painful reminder of Kerren's overreach, but it also galvanized him to act. Every scar on the wood was a badge of honor, a testament to the battle he was fighting for every farmer and homeowner who believed in the value of individuality. Fade out on Cal sketching out final plans by lamplight, the silhouette of Daisy grazing in the background. A quiet promise that the war for property rights and personal legacy was far from over. Desperation drives some to rash measures. In a final bid to regain control, Kerren escalated her campaign of intimidation to new and legally dubious heights. One scorching afternoon, just as the community was gearing up for the annual summer barbecue, word spread like wildfire. Kerren intended to host her own neighborhood cookout, complete with community-approved fare. But behind the festive facade lurked an ulterior motive. She planned to roast not just marshmallows, but what she claimed was a rogue baby lamb from Cal's farm, a stunt designed to embarrass him and force him into submission. Cal's heart pounded in disbelief as he learned of Kerren's diabolical plan. The idea of harming an innocent animal, let alone one that had become a beloved symbol on his farm, was abhorrent. Fueled by anger and a deep sense of protectiveness, Cal vowed to put an end to Kerren's cruelty once and for all. Before the barbecue could even be set, Cal mobilized his network. Across the region, local farmers, proud, hard-working individuals who had long suffered under the HOA's arbitrary rules, rallied to his cause. Word went out, if Kerren thought she could target Cal's baby lamb, she would face the full might of a SWAT team of angry farmers. On the day of the barbecue, as Kerren's meticulously organized event got underway in the meticulously manicured park behind the community center, a convoy of pickup trucks rumbled in from the countryside. The trucks, adorned with farming logos and bumper stickers proclaiming land, livelihood, and liberty, rolled to a halt at the park's edge. Farmers, armed not with weapons but with pitchforks, tools, and a burning determination, stepped out to confront the tyrant. Kerren, mid-speech and mid-flip of burgers on her grill, froze as the crowd of resolute farmers approached. "What is the meaning of this?" she demanded, her voice faltering as she tried to maintain control of the situation. Cal stepped forward from the ranks of the assembled farmers, his eyes blazing with righteous fury. "You tried to roast my baby lamb, Kerren," he declared. "Today, you will see that our community won't stand for cruelty, intimidation, or the abuse of power." The atmosphere shifted instantly. Kerren's legal advisors fumbled with documents, and the HOA board members, now emboldened by the united front of the local farming community, looked on in shock. Shouts of "enough" and "stand up for your rights" echoed through the park. The farmers, a veritable SWAT team in spirit, surrounded the barbecue area, firm, determined, and united. Amid the chaos, a local news crew captured the moment. Cameras zoomed in on Kerren's panicked face as she scrambled to regain composure. But it was too late. The tide had turned. The community had spoken in a language more powerful than any fine or warning notice: action. Kerren's plan to humiliate Cal and his beloved lamb had backfired spectacularly. As the day wore on, Kerren's barbecue turned into a public relations debacle. What was meant to be an exercise in control was now a full-blown community protest. Neighbors and farmers mingled with visitors, sharing stories of resistance and newfound unity. Cal's stand against tyranny had galvanized not only his own resolve, but that of the entire community, sending a clear message. No one, not even HOA Kerren, could trample the rights of a farmer or the welfare of an innocent creature. Fade out on the scene. A defiant Cal shaking hands with fellow farmers as Kerren's grill smolders in the background, a symbol of a misguided authority finally overthrown. In the aftermath of the disastrous barbecue, the community's fury reached a fever pitch. With Kerren's actions now documented on every social media platform and local news outlet, the pressure on the HOA board became insurmountable. A special meeting was called at the community center, and residents poured in with their grievances and evidence of past abuses. The once unquestioned authority of HOA, Kerren, was now under a microscope, and it wasn't long before cracks appeared in her once impenetrable facade. At the meeting, board members were confronted with the damning footage of the attempted lamb roasting, alongside testimonies from outraged neighbors and farmers. The evidence was overwhelming. Kerren's policies were arbitrary, her fines were extortionate, and her actions had gone well beyond enforcing community standards. They were acts of cruelty and bullying. One by one, board members began to question their support for her regime. In a historic vote, the board unanimously agreed to remove Kerren from her position as HOA president. The news spread like wildfire. Within hours, Kerren's personal email inbox was flooded with angry messages, and her reputation in the community was in tatters. The very next day, a moving truck was spotted outside her meticulously maintained suburban home, now marked for sale as a consequence of her public disgrace. For Cal, the victory was sweet and long overdue. With Kerren gone, he turned his attention to rebuilding his property on his own terms. The electrified metal fence project, once a symbol of defiant innovation, was completed amid applause from his supportive neighbors. Every energized spark and every secure panel was a testament to the community's reclaimed autonomy, a shining rebuttal to years of arbitrary HOA overreach. As the days turned to weeks, other homeowners began sharing their own experiences of abuse and mistreatment under Kerren's watch. A series of class action lawsuits was launched against the HOA, and local authorities initiated a full audit of its practices. Fines were levied, and the remaining board members faced public scrutiny for their complicity. The era of arbitrary rule was ending, replaced by a new model of transparent, accountable governance. Fade out on a montage of smiling residents gathered at a community picnic, a neighborhood finally free to celebrate its individuality and shared heritage. In the background, Cal stood proudly by his new fence, a living symbol of justice restored. The legal fallout from Kerren's misdeeds swept through the community like a tidal wave. In the weeks following her removal, government officials and independent auditors began a thorough investigation into the practices of the now-defunct HOA. Documents were subpoenaed, bank records scrutinized, and testimonies collected. The evidence revealed a disturbing pattern of abuse, arbitrary fines, selective enforcement, and the misappropriation of funds to bolster Kerren's personal agenda. A series of court hearings ensued, with Cal's meticulously maintained dossier serving as a key piece of evidence. During one pivotal hearing, a judge sternly declared, "This case is a clear example of institutional overreach and abuse of power. The homeowners of this community have suffered greatly under these misguided policies." Fines were imposed on the HOA, and those board members who had actively supported Kerren's actions faced personal penalties. Even Kerren's longtime legal advisor was dragged into the controversy, as questions about his ethics and complicity in her schemes came to light. The ruling not only dismantled the old HOA, but set a precedent for other communities facing similar struggles. Homeowners, emboldened by their newfound legal victory, celebrated the dismantling of an oppressive system that had long stifled their individuality. Fade out on the courthouse steps, where residents, arms linked in solidarity, stepped forward into a future defined by fairness, accountability, and renewed community spirit. With the legal verdicts rendered and the old HOA structure dismantled, Kerren's personal world crumbled irreversibly. Once the unchallenged enforcer of impossible standards, she was now reduced to a cautionary tale, a figure shunned by a community that had reclaimed its dignity. Local news outlets replayed footage of her frantic attempts to salvage her reputation, and social media buzzed with memes and biting commentary mocking her downfall. In the ensuing weeks, creditors began circling. Kerren's luxurious car was repossessed, and mounting debts forced the sale of her once prized suburban home. At a public hearing intended to wrap up the final details of her removal, Kerren's pleas fell on deaf ears. One by one, residents recounted stories of her tyrannical rule, each account chipping away at the last remnants of her credibility. The ultimate irony came when, in a desperate bid to restart her career in a less scrutinized environment, Kerren was seen applying for a position as an assistant property manager for another HOA, an institution that prided itself on transparency and fairness. The sight of her, humbled and out of place, evoked quiet laughter and sympathetic nods from those who remembered her previous reign. "I hope you like following the rules," Cal muttered under his breath as he passed by, a final, poetic barb at the fallen tyrant. fade out on Kerren's solitary figure trudging down a busy street, the whispers of her past misdeeds trailing in the wind. A stark reminder that no one is above accountability. Months later, the neighborhood had transformed. The oppressive aura of the old HOA was replaced by a vibrant community spirit, one that celebrated individuality, heritage, and the simple joys of rural life. Cal's farm had become a symbol of resistance and hope, and his electrified fence, now shining in the afternoon sun, stood as a permanent monument to the victory over tyranny. One balmy evening, as Cal relaxed on his porch with Daisy grazing contentedly in the pen nearby, a group of neighbors gathered for a casual get-together. Laughter filled the air, and someone, ever the joker, handed Cal a mock HOA violation notice for being too darn inspiring. Cal chuckled, replying, "They really tried." In the park at the center of the newly reformed community, a celebration was held in honor of the residents' hard-won freedom. Speeches were made, stories shared, and for one unforgettable night, the scars of the past were healed by collective joy and the promise of a fairer future. As the evening drew to a close, the camera panned over smiling faces, the well-lit streets, and the unmistakable glow of hope that shone from every corner of the neighborhood. Cal's quiet leadership had sparked a revolution, not just against a single tyrant, but against any force that sought to strip away the soul of a community. Fade out on the panoramic view of a neighborhood at peace, a final mic drop on an era of oppression, and the beginning of a legacy built on unity, justice, and the unwavering spirit of those who dare to stand up for what matters.